Right now on Tech Radio, €1 billion, a foldable iPhone, and an author telling big tech to back off.
Hi, I'm Artemis. I am a computer-generated AI voice, and you're listening to Tech Radio.
Every week online, we bring you the latest in tech from Ireland and across the world. This week, it's all breaking news with SpaceX. We have almost €1 billion being put into Irish tech and AI research. And we look at the main reveals at Apple's WWDC earlier in the week. Plus, with our guest author, Kate O'Neill, we'll be chatting about the value of humans at the centre of business when everybody thinks that data and AI is going to solve all of the problems.
This is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
I'm Dusty. Niall, unfortunately, not able to join us this week, but I'll give you a quick overview on what's been happening in the news before we get into an amazing interview this week. Kicking off with SpaceX. We're recording this on Thursday afternoon in around about 24 hours at 2:30 on Friday afternoon. Everybody who managed to get shares in SpaceX as part of their IPO will be able to publicly trade them on the NASDAQ exchange when it opens at 9:30 New York time on Friday. The question is, how much are they going to sell for? The IPO had the shares priced at $135. If there's a huge amount of demand, that could go through the roof or to the moon appropriately. Or maybe people will say, no, it's completely overpriced, and maybe the price will go down. It's going to be a very interesting day. Personally, I think that it will be popular and the price will go up, and it could well be the Wall Street equivalent of selling tickets to an Oasis gig, complete with surge pricing. What was it, 135 you said? No, sorry, they're 200 quid now. Who knows? I'll tell you who else will be looking very, very carefully at this is OpenAI and Anthropic, because they are both looking and have announced that they're going to be going for IPOs later this year. So they'll be watching what's happening. And Perplexity, the other major AI, has also announced that they are considering an IPO as well. So all of those, plus SpaceX, the makeup of the NASDAQ, which is the tech exchange, is changing considerably. And of course, if everybody gets onto the S&P, which still needs to be decided, and it'll take them a minimum 6 months to get onto it, we'll see how that affects the general American economy and stock exchange. However, for today and the price on the shares for SpaceX, we will, of course, be covering that as a breaking story on the website at techcentral.ie. Here in Ireland, also big money. €1 billion is going into a new tech research group. There's going to be 7 new centres around the country researching various categories of technology, including AI, energy, quantum computing, and semiconductors. There's some also medical bioscience in there as well. The €1 billion that's going into it is coming half and half from the government is putting 460 million into it, and private sources in the industry is going to be putting another 500 million in as well. So that brings it up to a nice round number. The group is going to be called RIN. And when I heard it first, I went, okay, so Research Ireland, very good, RIN, so it'll be Research Ireland Network. No. I should have remembered my Irish lessons in school. RIN is the Irish word for point, which I thought was really nice, actually. And it also ties in with Research Ireland Network as well. I'm sure you may know of the ADAPT Centre, who we've spoken to many times over the years. They are kind of focused on AI. That's why we have spoken to them, and they're going to get a huge chunk of that funding, and they're going to be part of RIN. There's a 6-month crossover period where RIN starts officially on the 1st of July. The crossover period runs until the 31st of December, after which all of the bodies such as the ADAPT Centre are going to be assumed into RIN, and then from the 1st of January next year, away they go. But great to see huge money like that, and especially for this tiny little sodden, rain-soaked rock. I know the weather hasn't been great. To have that kind of money going into tech research, and Ireland has such a great reputation for, kind of punching way above our weight in many, many things, including tech. So the best of luck to everybody at RIN and all involved. Speaking of tech and Ireland, we are looking at a new Ireland AI office. An Oireachtas report has come out this week with 39 recommendations on AI and how it will be used in public service initially. This is kind of like the second round of recommendations, and the reason why they're going through this is because they are drafting a bill at the moment called the Regulation of Artificial Intelligence Bill. And the reason that has to go through the Irish Oireachtas is because it is required for the EU AI Act. Now, Niall has spoken a lot of times about the EU AI Act, which is in force, but part of the way that works in the EU is that each country has to kind of take the main text of that EU AI Act and transpose it into its national legislation. And that is what we are doing with the Regulation of Artificial Intelligence Bill. So part of that, as they are ramping it up, is the 39 recommendations, which include taking the AI office out of them at where it is at the moment, which is part of the Department of Enterprise, Tourism and Employment. I mean, can you imagine the Department of Enterprise, Tourism and AI and Employment? Why do they do this? It's beyond me. However, I think a Department of AI on its own, or even just an Office of AI, such as we have for Commission to Man, would be a good thing. Lots and lots of recommendations in there. Many of them have been said before. One of them, which is of interest to you and I, is that they want to make it mandatory for public service bodies to label when they are using AI. I don't know why this comes into my head, but you remember the public services card when it came out first and they were doing facial recognition? And they were claiming, no, we're not doing facial recognition. And then eventually it turns out that they were, and that kind of stuff. I think it's mandatory. If a public service body is using AI, you should at least know about it. So I suppose that's a good thing. And one of the other main recommendations has come out is that Ireland should have robust legislation to deal with AI. And I think we are learning lessons as a country after dealing with Apple and the fact that, you know, we had to take the 13 billion off them. No, just leave it resting in our account. Also with Commission to Man, who are the media regulator in Ireland, have got a huge oversight over the big tech companies, Meta, et cetera, and so on and so forth. So I think kind of learning that we are growing as a country, and I think we have an excellent reputation internationally for doing good business. So I think an Irish AI office is going to be a good thing. Finally, in news this week, and I can't believe this in some ways, Apple and WWDC was on this week. It's not our lead story. It's our last story. Like, what is going on? What did they announce? They announced Siri is now going to be Siri AI. And essentially from what they've shown and from what we have seen is that Siri is basically just going to do what Google has been doing for the last year or 2 years even. On the plus side, Siri will be able to read data on your phone. So you'll be able to talk to your phone and you'll be able to say, I'm supposed to meet Kevin at Friday evening. Do I have anything else on? And the phone will should answer back and say, well, actually, I've got a hot date with whatever that Friday evening. Perhaps you can meet Kevin on Saturday morning for breakfast. That kind of stuff, right? And it's because it is able to access your calendar and your email and your notes and whatever else it is you have on your phone that it's able to do all this. And that's good. The bad side of it is that because of this, Siri AI will not be available in Ireland or across the European Union, which is kind of a bad thing. The reason for that is because the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, means that Apple would have to give that kind of unrestricted access on your phone that Siri AI has to read almost everything. It's reading photos, your calendar, your emails, your documents. It would have to give that same unfettered access on your phone to all other AI assistants. This is their argument. Now, I would trust Apple because they're very good on privacy and they've got an excellent reputation. But would you trust another AI assistant? Okay, so you might trust Google. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you trust Perplexity or whichever. But what about other AI assistants what about DeepSeek from China? Would you trust that to have unrestricted access to every single piece of information on your phone? This is the argument that Apple are making. And they're making a big thing. They're kind of saying, well, the big bad nasty EU and their restrictive rules over there mean that we won't be able to launch that in the EU. And the EU have kind of come back and said, there's nothing preventing Apple from launching Siri AI in the EU. All they have to do is to make sure that it's also accessible to other AI assistants. So it's an Apple call. And Apple are saying, well, privacy, and all that. So it's a bit of a tic-tac, whatever. I think I would come down on Apple's side and say, I think they are right. But I'm a Gemini. This is a curse because you see both sides of an argument. I would also agree with the EU because there is nothing to stop Apple from doing it. The problem is that Apple hasn't come up with a solution on how to allow other AI assistants on the phone, but maybe to allow Siri with better access. I don't know what ways. But anyway, the solution is there. Apple should come up with it if they want to sell phones in the EU. Or the other thing is that Apple could just turn around and say, do you know what? We can't work with this. So we are withdrawing from the EU. iPhones will just simply not be sold in the EU. I wonder, how would that play with the population? Because when you look at, kind of recently we had the water charges, and then there were other protests recently. I've forgotten already what they were about. But anyways, would people actually rise up en masse and say, we need our iPhones, let them do whatever? Interesting. What if Apple actually did say, all right, okay, EU, market of whatever, 450 million people, we can't work with the DMA, we're pulling out. That would be an amazing story. I'd love to see how that would work out. However, that's Siri AI. That was kind of one of the big announcements at WWDC, and it was. They also had announcements for Apple Intelligence in general, which is available in the EU, and it's available on your laptops and your Mac Minis and whatever else it is that you have. The big thing that everybody seems to have latched on to with Apple Intelligence is that it allows you to organize your browser tabs into topics or subjects. And if that is what we are burning up half of the energy in the planet in order to run these massive data centers, I think we are all going to hell in a basket. There are other improvements, password app improvements, auto replies to emails, that kind of stuff. They made a big thing about liquid glass, which they announced in their last year's WWDC, kind of a transparent look for the Mac iOS. And OS, this time now you have a slider to control the amount of transparency. Again, we're going to hell in a basket if this is the big thing that they're talking about. There was a lot of stuff about child safety, I don't have a child, so I kind of skipped all over that. I do wonder, though, who's going to hand an iPhone 17 to a 13-year-old? However. And another thing that I have been hearing a lot about is that the iPhone 16, now that's just one behind, all right? The iPhone 16 was meant to be the Siri AI phone. This was going to be, hey, Apple Intelligence, this is it. It's going to be amazing. Da, da, da. A lot of the advanced improvements which they've announced this year will not work on the iPhone 16. The one that was supposed to work in the first place. A lot of people not very happy about that. The most interesting thing to come from WWDC, however, is what Apple didn't say. And it was more a hint than anything else if you dig into the code. Because when you dig into the code of what they were announcing, you will see that there is support for the resizing of iOS apps. I kind of think, well, okay, so yeah, same app. It'll show one way on an iPhone, it'll show another way on an iPad, it'll show another way on a laptop or whatever. What the smart thinkers are saying is this is pointing towards an iPhone foldable. So that if you have an app that's running in regular Candy Bar and then you open up the phone, it will open it up in a larger format, and it will do so automatically, resizing everything. So iPhone foldable, I think is going to be a thing that we are going to see before the end of 2026. And we're halfway through the year already, so that could be great. Just in time for Christmas. Anyway, there you go. That is the news for this week. Let's get to our interview.
Delivering Irish tech news since 2006, this is Tech Radio.
We've all heard terms like person-centric or human-centered, but in business, do those terms apply to the company staff and management or to the consumers with the problem that they're trying to solve? Kate O'Neill is an author, speaker and host of the excellent Tech Humanist Show. She spoke with Niall Kitson earlier this week about understanding the business value of trust and authenticity.
Kate, you found this really interesting space between technology and humanism, and I like to think it's defined as much, you're a techno-optimist as much as you're a techno-humanist. So tell us a little bit about, the term itself, and then what, I guess for a nicer way to put it, what you bring to the party.
All right. Well, it's funny. You actually introduced some good tension there, because I will say right away, I'm not a techno-optimist. That term has been co-opted by people who believe that technology is the solution to everything. And that is certainly not my position. So tech humanism for me represents this more happy medium where you say, look, we want human values to be the priority. We want human flourishing to be the priority. And at the same time, we recognize that, where technology meets the human experience, it does so because it's been amplified and accelerated by business objectives. So we need to be able to recognize that as a reality. We need business to succeed and use technology successfully, but we need that to happen in a way that respects the human condition and respects the human experience in a way that can help humanity thrive. So we look for the opportunity to find alignment between what business is trying to achieve and what humanity is trying to achieve, and use technology to enhance and accelerate that alignment, as opposed to merely accelerating business objectives, which is where I think the default would tend to go.
I think I can almost picture the boardrooms at the moment where you go in and you make a presentation and you're like, okay, I speak a little bit of engineer, I speak a little bit of manager, but here's what this actually means for people. Is that kind of your space?
Yeah. And it's funny that you use this, sort of implicit metaphor of language speaking, because that is my background. I'm a linguist by education. I speak, or at least attempt to speak, lots and lots of languages. And so it is not too removed from reality to suggest that I'm thinking about it in those ways, that I'm thinking about the language that engineers speak, the language that executives speak, and the language of the layman, kind of on the street or in the world, who doesn't have any particular interest in what the executives are trying to accomplish or what the engineers are trying to accomplish, and just wants to live their life, man. So it is trying to reconcile those different perspectives and the different, viewpoints, the different priorities that people bring, and know that the decision ultimately is going to be about the success of the business. So I have to be the person who most fiercely and fervently and consistently represents the user interest, the patient interest, the student interest, all these different roles that humanity plays inside of the transactionality of business relationships, because that's how they're going to be represented in the boardroom is, our customers, our guests, our users, our patient base, whatever. And we have to be sure, or I have to be sure, that there's dimensionality to that people are being represented as their whole selves, that we can bring it down to like how people are actually able to carry on beyond the interaction or the transaction with the business, and not be surveilled and not be, carrying a bunch of baggage with them because of the interaction with a business that now owns the data of that relationship or whatever the case may be. So there's a whole lot there, and it is definitely a complex problem to help solve, but I think it's the fundamental one right now.
And in putting the user first, whether it be, as you identified, the student, the nurse, the doctor, etc.
Yeah.
In times past, people sort of defaulted back to these ideas of, having personas from marketing, that sort of thing. I imagine your perspective is slightly more in depth and slightly more flexible.
Yeah. I think personas are, probably a useful shortcut in certain contexts, but I think, we can default too much to imagining an averaged out person in that form of the persona. And we don't necessarily have empathy for a persona. We don't necessarily have empathy for, the edge cases where we may design an experience around the average that we've created in a persona. But there's someone, I can't remember where this comes from, but a brilliant book in the aughts. I think someone wrote about analytics and used this quote that if your audience consisted of an 80-year-old in New York and a 3-year-old in San Diego, you would not average it out and say that your audience is 40-year-olds in Kansas City, right? Like, it's really important that you have your finger on the pulse of the reality of who is actually out there and what their real needs are. So I think, what we see a lot is these days organizations looking at, could they, bring a conversational AI into their customer support function, for example, and automate the whole thing, and then be able to, have people who are calling in or chatting in, have their needs completely met by chatbots. And what happens is that 80-20, right? Like 80% of those probably will be able to be met by chatbots. They're calling in with password resets, or they can't get access to their account, or whatever the case may be. But the 20% are really important. The 20% are people who don't match that average scenario, and their spouse just died and they need someone to hold their hand and walk them through a process, or they had a fire and need to file an insurance claim or whatever. And there's just emotional intelligence that needs to be part of that story. And there's contextual awareness, and there's good judgment calls that need to be made, overriding defaults. And those kinds of things are not where we turn to AI or machinery for. We turn to other humans for having those characteristics. And it's really important that we continue to do that.
Yeah. And, those edge cases are certainly something that can't really be informed by data either, which is sort of something else that managers are falling back on now. It's like, what does the data tell us? Well, you're kind of there for those cases that the data doesn't quite cover.
The data is going to show us some of that. And I have worked with quite a number of organizations that try to do, increasing amounts of automation in something like customer support. But I think the better scenario, the better approach here is generally to say, let the data support the human who can provide a more human interaction for people at those edges of those scenarios. Let the human operator use the data to, sort of support and accelerate their ability to find answers for people and provide people with meaningful help in a scenario that doesn't match, the exactly proscribed, flow of a use case that's like, okay, missing password, go here, do this. If it's something a lot more nuanced and that requires good judgment, let's have a human operator do that and let software support them. Let automation, be smart enough to prompt them with, okay, I proactively searched the database and I'm putting the information in front of you so that you can say this to the other person. And then they can override that if they need to. It's there's some really good solutions out there, but I think the temptation is to assume that we are automating everything, that by removing humans from the equation, that we're removing friction. And what we're actually doing is instead changing what we value in those situations. What we're saying is that we used to value providing help to people and doing it efficiently. And now what we value is frictionless efficiency, and nowhere is there compassion or empathy in that equation. So there's a recalculation or a re-understanding that I think organizations often have to do in order to make sure that they've brought in a true full accounting of what it means to be an AI forward company in 2026 and beyond, and still put humans at the center of their operation.
And in putting humans at the center of the operation, there's a tremendous responsibility there to make sure that, a chatbot feels like you're talking to a chatbot, albeit a very efficient one, and a human feels like a human when you're talking to that. There doesn't seem to be that sort of recognition at the moment, where it seems to be a race to create the most authentic sounding chatbot that we can. The downside of which is that people are developing, parasocial or, very personal or even romantic relationships with chatbots, because, those ethical guardrails just haven't been there. It's just a case of let's do this as quickly as possible and get as much engagement and get as much loyalty to the platform. Do you think that, the absence of these guardrails has in a lot of ways led to a weaponization of human empathy?
Yeah, there's a couple of things happening there. I think one is that humans have a tendency to anthropomorphize whatever we interact with, right? Like how many people have nicknames for their toaster? Like it's a very common phenomenon to just, or nicknames for your car or whatever. It's not at all uncommon for humans to, ascribe personalities to the inanimate objects that they interact with. So logically, something that's inanimate and yet interacts as if it is animate would be, sort of subject to that kind of assignment of personality and assumption of there being something there, like a consciousness is there. So that's going to be natural for humans to respond that way. And then the other thing that's happening that kind of complicates that is that there's financial incentive for AI companies to muddy the waters a little bit there and to sort of suggest that maybe there is consciousness, maybe there is sentience. Because right now there's sort of an arms race of these frontier models and AI developers coming out literally every day with incremental updates to their models. And any edge that they have to be able to suggest ours can do this now, ours has this capability now, ours may or may not be sentient, right? It's a very possible way to suggest to people we're just a little bit smarter than the other models, and this is why you should be spending your money on a subscription with this model and not that one. So that's a little bit mixed motivations there, and it's something that I don't think that we have yet had quite enough years of experience with interacting with tools like this for the majority of people to really have developed a resistance to or a tolerance for. So, we're really kind of in the worst of both of those worlds where we've got these kind of human instincts that accept the idea of consciousness from those interlocutors that we have, even if they're technically inanimate. And then the motivations of the companies that are kind of, opportunistically using this moment to suggest that their model is better because it actually shows a little possibility of consciousness.
I think there's an interesting parallel to be drawn with virtual reality because, I'm sure you've used VR at some stage, and it's amazing how little it takes for your brain to actually read something as being real. Like if you happen to be on looking down at something at a height in VR, your body registers it as being a threat. And this is kind of where we are with AI, isn't it? That people will just register a voice as being, related to something sentient.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, this kind of where it comes back in for me in being a linguist by education, because the understanding of how we process meaning as, kind of related to our embodied experiences in the world and the way that language shapes meaning in our brains and the way that these are all very connected ideas. So we're used to the idea that as users of language, we're making meaningful experiences. We're thriving in the world. We're alive and existent. And we're interacting with something that is using our language and it's using it convincingly. So it naturally kind of triggers that understanding that we should have these mirror neurons firing, just like you're saying about like VR, looking down in VR. It's that sense that something's talking to me. Mirror neurons are going and saying, okay, well, I'm supposed to be empathetic now. I'm supposed to be creating a relationship with this. I'm supposed to be imagining the inner life of the other interlocutor. And that is obviously where we're getting tripped up.
Yeah, it sort of looks to that core value of trust, really. That's really what imbues our interactions with meaning. Is that a message that has landed with companies that, you're not just getting people to trust the AI, you're actually, to a certain extent, trying to convince someone that the AI is pro you?
Yeah, it is. I think there's a couple of examples that have really made that particularly resonant, that trust is not just a soft, warm and fuzzy construct. It is actually related to risk. and one of the things that companies need to be thinking proactively about in order to create a healthy risk profile and risk management profile. But the examples that I have, one, for example, is Air Canada had an instance where it had a chatbot that a traveler was interacting with, and the chatbot had told the traveler that there was some special bereavement fare that he was eligible for. And it turned out that that didn't exist, and that wasn't a policy, that it had been hallucinated by the chatbot. But in a Canadian tribunal, they found that if the company's chatbot said it, that the company had to back it. Like, basically, if you're allowing these chatbots or conversational AI agents to interact on your behalf, you're responsible for the language that they use, for any hallucinations they might come up with acting on your behalf. So if it says it, you said it. And I think that is a really interesting moment of tension and accountability to be able to kind of extend out over the precedent of other companies trying to imagine how they're going to transition into a more AI forward interaction style, or what they're going to do to make sure that they're utilizing all the efficiency they can gain, but without increasing the trust without increasing the risk of violating customer trust.
Let's look at, I think you raised the issue of productivity there. It is sort of the great, how would you say, the great promise of AI that it is going to make us a lot more productive. However, do you think, offloading an awful lot of the jobs that we're meant to be doing ends up creating output that is either good enough or at a minimum viable level, or at worst, just very synthetic and inauthentic?
Yeah, I think it's all of those things, right? We are all experiencing the glut of generative AI slop, right? We're all getting that everywhere, especially LinkedIn is probably one of the best places to go and experience lots and lots of slop. And I think companies recognize that that's a risk, and there's all kinds of programs different companies have to try to, create education programs for their employees to adopt the use of AI. Like, we've got a enterprise copilot, and we want everyone using it, and we want them to be using it in these particular ways and with this particular structured data set. But the problem tends to be that not everyone has the same level of skill at using the tools or kind of prompting well and making sure that they're getting the right kind of output. Not everyone understands what data sets they should use or shouldn't use. This is something that's kind of been an ongoing evergreen problem throughout my career. I remember working 20 years ago on an intranet for a hospital corporation, and there was an ethics and compliance policy that needed to be updated every year and needed to be available to everyone on the intranet. But the content management, the sort of governance of that document and making sure that people were accessing the latest version of that policy and not previous year's version of that policy was so tricky, because every department wanted to host it on their own internal departmental intranet. And so you always ended up with 100 copies of this thing that you needed to kind of wrangle like cats, herding cats, and try to figure out how are we going to have an authoritative one source. Well, now, that kind of problem is amplified a million times because everybody's kind of creating their own version of every document, and they live in an unstructured way across, an enterprise cloud hosted or folder structure or whatever. I mean, it's chaos out there. So it has really become a very difficult problem for companies to get the results out of it. At the same time, there are plenty of people who are individually trying to resist the use of AI in their jobs, and for understandable reasons. But then the company is kind of incentivizing or threatening, depending on what sort of posture they take there, about kind of wanting to have employees adopt. Then you have cases where people are using the tools but not disclosing that they're using the tools because they don't want to have the kind of accountability creep of like, I used to be able to do my job in 3 hours. Now I can do it in 15 minutes, but I want to reclaim that 2+ hours for myself. And so there's all kinds of different understandings of, what the rules are in this situation and who should be owning that productivity. So that's one of the complexities, I think, in this future of work, future of jobs discourse is not only are those, in fact, future work and future jobs, two completely different stories, but within them is nested a discussion of the future of tasks and the future of job roles and the future of productivity and the future of labor relations. And all of those things have a different trajectory, one from the other. So it's a very messy conversation and one we can only have meaningfully if we can pull apart which piece we're actually talking about and who's incentivized to do what and why, and how do we trust that the organization is, providing the right kind of futures for us.
So in advising organizations who have come to you saying, look, we want to be AI first. We know that, people coming out of college, their skills may or may not be something, we're looking for, or maybe people out in the job market already might be too expensive. What kind of skills are people looking for, and how do you sort of point them into the direction of thinking, well, maybe you have to look at your workforce in a more holistic fashion as opposed to being quite, granular and task oriented?
Yeah, there's definitely a problem right now with the existing openings that companies have. I mean, you've probably seen this data that many of the openings companies list for jobs are listed as if they're entry level, but they're actually hiring more senior people into those roles. And then there is actually some opposite as well, where sometimes senior roles will be listed and entry level people may be hired into those because they're accelerating, they're sort of leapfrogging the capabilities. It's a mess with the job listings. The other piece that's kind of an interesting data point to consider in relation to what you just posed is that we do know that job listings that list AI skills as a requirement price in about a 28% premium over those that don't. So we know that for the time being, there is a premium in the market for people who are showing up with AI skills. So we have some understanding of what the market is actually doing, what it's moving toward. The tricky thing, though, I think, is within an organization, you have a base of employees, and if you're an executive looking at the organizational structure, you may be thinking, well, the thing we're supposed to be doing is upskilling and reskilling. If you're being responsible about it, you're thinking about that. And that is truly important. But I think one of the things that's being skipped is the important part is role redefinition to make sure that there is actually something for people to evolve into. So we can reskill and upskill people who are at any level of the organization. But if what we're doing is consolidating the functions at that level or of that role, and we don't have a logical place for the redefined job role to go with those upskilled characteristics, then we've just lost that institutional knowledge from people who drop out of the organization, either voluntarily or not voluntarily. We have lost the trust of the people who remain in the organization in any kind of trust or credibility that there's going to be longevity for me in this organization. So it's a very complicated scenario, but I think one of the steps that organizations can take, leaders can take, is by making sure they put the role redefinition emphasis first, making sure that they're thinking about what does a reorganized version, what does an evolved version of this company that is meeting the moment of being AI forward. I wouldn't say AI first. AI forward is the term I would prefer there. If I'm AI forward and I'm human first and I'm human centric in my organization, then what does that end up looking like? If we can automate this whole tranche of tasks, and that takes away a certain amount of responsibility from people who were doing those tasks. Now I believe that the people who were doing those tasks have a good amount of ability to, use emotional intelligence and good judgment. That seems like really great opportunity for this job role if they're reskilled into it. Now let's go ahead and reskill them and put them into that role And then we can create hierarchy and we can create, management and structure within that. But it's important that those are happening together and not as an afterthought.
And that creates a much more dynamic corporate environment as well. I mean, it basically means that, pretty much everyone in the C-suite has to have their eye on the ball and see, well, these are the conversations happening with our engineers. This is what's happening with our product guys. They're taking the time that is being freed up to think much more strategically than tactically. Right,
exactly. And that is happening across so many different organizations that, more and more of the work that happens with, there's a corollary to upskilling and reskilling that I talk about, which is, I call it minimum viable skilling. And that is prompt skilling. Prompt skilling is just the idea that if we're going to be using AI tools, generative AI tools across the organization, and most of them have prompting as an interaction mechanism for the tool, then it is important that everyone, literally everyone in the organization, learn to prompt well. And that's something that we should make sure people have the skill to do. It's not about prompt engineering. That's just about making sure that people know how to articulate and sort of put in boundary conditions and success criteria and explain well what they want the tool to accomplish. And the great thing about doing that is that it's the exact same thing that you would want someone to know if you want them to be able to delegate well or communicate well in a team and collaborate well and play well with others. So I think that is a skill set that I really encourage leaders and managers to put in place inside their organizations, is make sure you're teaching people how to use these tools, because at a minimum, what it's going to do is make people better communicators.
And just lastly, part of being a better communicator is having that, having a distinct voice as a person, just to make sure that, what you're sending somebody isn't just a transcript or a direct answer from Chat or Claude, but to show that, you might be using it, but this is your interpretation of it as well. Do you consider that a real value add as well?
Yeah, 100%. I had a TEDx talk I did in October last year called "We Cannot Leave Meaning Up to Machines." And it is one of the key ideas within that we can't sort of assume that all of the richness of what we're trying to convey could possibly be generated by a large language model, by any kind of predictive engine that's merely trying to figure out the most likely next set of words. Like, we have to be able to come back to what it is we're trying to bring to the experience. It's purpose and meaning that comes from us in those interactions. That's not to say that generative AI tools, large language models, can't be useful in helping us kind of accelerate through the process of, starting with a blank page or, getting the bulk of something written. But we have to make sure that we're reading with a critical eye, that we're bringing voice back into it, that we're showing up as ourselves and making sure that there's something that we're truly adding to the moment that represents the truth and the knowing and the instinct that come with being human beings relating to other human beings who are going to consume and read this content. That is invaluable, and that's something that kind of comes for the ride with prompt skilling too. It's part of what I encourage people to make sure that they're instructing, is how to make sure you can show up and revise and not simply accept default output. Because there's a term that I use often to describe this, and it is competent sameness, which is to say that the results we get from a Claude, a ChatGPT, a Perplexity, so often what they look like is convincing. And the sound of it is I also refer to it as confidence theater, because it sounds confident, right? But it's only theater. It's only convincing you through its absolute confidence that it's the right output. And then you read it and you're used to responding to material that's been put in front of you with that much confidence, like, oh, well, it must be right. But that isn't what you're using the tool to do. What you're using the tool to do is, kind of get that structure in place. And then you bring in the confidence of knowing what you know and the context and the awareness of the situation that may be in play. Those kinds of things are the real critical value that can be added to the interaction.
That was Kate O'Neill. Her current book, What Matters Next? A Leader's Guide to Making Human-Friendly Tech Decisions in a World That's Moving Too Fast, is in stores and online now. I'll make sure we include a link to that in the show notes description area of this podcast.
This is Tech Radio with Dusty Rhodes and Niall Kitson.
that is it for our show this week. Do keep an eye on the website for the latest on the SpaceX IPO and how the share prices and all that kind of yada, yada, yada are going. Along with all of the other tech stories, website is at techcentral.ie. We're back again next Friday, hopefully with Niall Kitson rejoining us on a brand new show. In the meantime, please do share our podcast with a friend. Just tell them to look up Tech Radio Ireland on Apple, Spotify or YouTube. Until next time, from myself, Dusty Rhodes, thanks for listening. Have a great weekend.
Remember, you can get the latest Irish tech news with hourly updates, daily newsletters, and more at our website, techcentral.ie. Share the knowledge and invite a friend to listen. Search Apple, Spotify, or YouTube for Tech Radio Ireland. Tech Radio is produced by dustpod.io for techcentral.ie. From me, Artemis, live long and prosper.